high above the ordinary paths, where the wind never quite stops moving, something enormous is already awake. Not loud, not hurried, just present, like a glacier that decided to learn how to breathe. Tonight, we take a slow walk through the Iceshard Cliffs and through the apex that rules them when the frost winds arrive. Jin Dahaad. The Iceshard Cliffs are a vertical world. Stone rises in sheer faces, broken into shelves and ledges that look like they were carved by patience rather than violence. Snow gathers in seams, ice clings to corners, and the wind lives here the way water lives in a river, always flowing, always shaping. Even in calmer conditions, the cold feels active. It bites at exposed skin, creeps into gloves, and turns every breath into a reminder that heat is a resource. The cliffs never let you forget that you are spending warmth to move through them. But the cliffs, like the other regions of the Forbidden Lands, do not stay in one state. They move through a rhythm. There are stretches where travel feels possible, where the air clears enough to see routes and landmarks, where the terrain reads cleanly, and where the ecosystem follows patterns that almost resemble stability. In those periods, danger does not disappear, but it becomes legible. You can see what you are risking. You can plan, you can choose. And then there is the inclemency, the frost winds, a violent season of cutting wind and dense snow, where the horizon shortens and the world becomes a moving veil of white. When the frost winds rise, the cliffs feel less like a landscape and more like weather made solid. Sound flattens, distance collapses. The edge of vision becomes a wall that moves with you. Navigation stops being a question of where you want to go and becomes a question of what the environment will allow you to do without punishing you immediately. Most creatures respond the same way. They shelter, they cling to hollows, they wait for the pressure to pass. Because in the frost winds, even a small mistake becomes expensive. A slipped foot can be a fall. A wrong ledge can become a dead end. And when visibility drops, confidence becomes a liability. The cliffs are already a place where traction decides outcomes. During inclemency, traction becomes something you cannot assume is real until it is already holding you. Every movement becomes a test the environment administers without warning. It is during this season that Jin Dahaad is described as most active, not always hunted here, not always fully confronted in the open, but seen, perched, leaning over cliff edges like a living overhang. And when it appears, it changes the cliffs from dangerous to owned. Jin Dahaad is a leviathan, titanic and serpentine, covered in gnarled grey hide and coppery metallic ridges. The first impression it gives is scale. Not just that it is big, but that it is built to be big, long enough to coil around terrain, heavy enough to feel like a piece of the mountain itself. Accounts and records consistently frame it as the apex of the Iceshard Cliffs ecosystem, a presence whose body is capable of powerful freezing attacks from nearly any contact surface. The word apex can be misleading in places like this because dominance is not always a matter of pursuit. In a vertical biome, the highest advantage is not speed, it is control of crossings. It is the ability to claim the routes that other life must use to survive. Even before you see Jin Dahaad, the cliffs begin to behave differently. Routes that should remain merely slick become strangely reliable, as though friction has been manufactured. Frost appears where it should not have had time to settle. In sheltered seams, you find ice that looks fresh, not weathered. In some places, steam lifts from stone faces with no geothermal explanation, a quiet contradiction that only makes sense once you understand that Jin Dahaad's cold is not simply ambient. It is a product. It has a source. When Jin Dahaad comes into view, it does not announce itself with motion. It announces itself with presence, a titanic body anchored along ledges, heavy enough to make the terrain look smaller. 4 limbs interrupt the serpentine length, and that detail is not aesthetic, it is functional. A purely limbless body can move like a river, but it cannot anchor like a building. Jin Dahaad's limbs give it purchase on rock in a way that a serpent alone could not manage, especially in the cliffs where verticality is not a feature, but the organizing principle of everything that lives there. The limbs are not there to make it faster. They are there to make it stable. Its head is comparatively small, often partially concealed beneath metallic facial plates. Beneath those plates, the eyes are described as beady and dark, and in some accounts, they are so recessed, you only realize you are being watched once you have already stopped being safe. Around each main eye are smaller ones, clustered like an extra ring of witnesses, bringing the total to 8. It is an unsettling detail, not because it reads as supernatural, but because it reads as practical. In the cliffs, danger is not only in front of you, it is above, below, and around angles you cannot face all at once. A distributed gaze suits a creature that lives on walls. When Jin Dahaad opens its mouth, the jaw structure folds outward in multiple segments, described as tripartite. The lower jaw can split, and the unfolding motion makes the act of breathing look like an engineered mechanism rather than a simple gape. Teeth are pointed and relatively small, with larger fangs along the outer jaw. The implication is not merely that it bites, but that its mouth is designed to do work beyond feeding. It is a channel, a nozzle, a structure meant to focus output. Near where the head meets the neck, metallic jagged horns form a hood, framing the face and transitioning into plated anatomy that continues down the body. The neck is long, and on either side are metallic plates similar in shape to ribs and vertebrae, making it look as if part of the skeleton has been turned outward. Across the shoulders, rod-shaped plates rise upward, while others spread horizontally across the back, and similar structures appear on the hips. The chest is ribbed and protruding, terminating in large spikes. Even the underside looks armed. In a vertical world, underside matters more than it does elsewhere. Falling, being flipped, being exposed from below are not rare circumstances. They are part of the environment's language. Jin Dahaad reads as a creature that evolved in a place where any orientation can become vulnerable, so none of them are allowed to be. The limbs continue the same pattern. Ridges run along the forelimbs. Above each wrist sits another row of spikes. The claws are angular, metallic, built for purchase, and in the palm position of each forelimb is a pronounced spike used to dig into terrain and anchor. It is one of those details that looks like ornament until you understand how it moves, and then it becomes the most honest thing about its design. A creature of this mass does not survive by stepping carefully. It survives by fastening itself to the world. The tail is long and sinuous, plated along its length, ending in an arrangement of spines pointing in multiple directions. In some descriptions, the tip forms a rake-like structure, as if the tail was designed not only to strike, but to sweep space clean. When Jin Dahaad moves, it does not thrash, it clears. It draws boundaries by removing what occupies them. Across its body, many of the ridges can fold in and out. Jin Dahaad is seen fanning them outward when cooling down and oscillating them when agitated. Even before you understand the details, that body language tells you what matters. Control, stability, temperature. Jin Dahaad's defining trait is not simply that it lives in the cold. It is that it produces cold by design. In the in-game description and Hunter's notes, it is described as surrounding its massive form in cold temperatures via ridge-like cooling organs across its body, and the frost its limbs produce doubles as both weapon and mobility tool, allowing travel along walls and even floating rocks. That is not just a combat gimmick. It is physiology expressed as ecology. The cliffs select for stability. Jin Dahaad turns temperature into stability. Those coppery ridges are referred to as ice plates, and material descriptions describe them as metallic plates whose properties allow them to freeze surrounding air. That one line is deceptively dense. Freezing surrounding air is not merely being cold. It implies heat is being actively extracted from the environment, not merely shed from the body. It suggests the plates are not passive armor, but functioning organs whose job is to move energy. This matches the in-world framing that Jin Dahaad uses its own enormous body as a live-in heat sink, shunting heat to its metallic plates to drastically lower internal temperature and the surrounding environment. A heat sink is a useful metaphor, but in practice, what you are observing is closer to a distributed thermal exchange network. Jin Dahaad is too large to ignore the metabolic problem of heat. Movement generates warmth. Muscle work generates warmth. Digestion generates warmth. Massive bodies are not automatically advantaged in cold regions. They are challenged by the need to offload energy without compromising function. If Jin Dahaad could not export heat, it would accumulate it, and that accumulation would reduce endurance, slow reaction time, and undermine the very stability that makes it an apex. The cliffs are not kind to large animals that overheat under exertion. They punish weakness quickly, and the only weakness that matters here is the one that causes a slip. So Jin Dahaad shunts heat outward. The ice plates absorb it. They store it. They vent it. Steam is described as rising from the ridges even when the creature is not fully active, suggesting the system is never entirely disengaged, always balancing, always maintaining gradients. In the same body of notes, there is that strange visual reversal. The plates can appear to glow while cooling, as if the act of becoming colder forces heat into the ridges until the ridges look heated. It is a contradiction only until you remember that heat is being moved, not destroyed. The core sheds warmth into the plates become the visible repository of that energy, and then the system vents. What reads as fire on an ice monster is a thermodynamic artifact of a creature pushing a cooling system beyond normal throughput. Some plates are described as tinted teal, likely oxidation from repeated cycling, and in arch-tempered individuals, the coloration is brighter, closer to brass or gold, as if the system runs harder and leaves a more vivid signature on the body. That visual story matters because it implies wear and long-term function. These are not decorative ridges. They are worked components. The output of that system is not limited to a single breath weapon. Jin Dahaad's hunter's notes emphasize that every part of its massive body is capable of powerful freezing attacks, and its offensive capability can be diminished by attacking the ridges it uses for cooling, with the largest ridges on its back described as particularly powerful. That mechanical instruction implies a biological truth. The ridges are the bottleneck. They are where the cold is made usable. They are where heat is moved, where gradients are maintained, where the creature's most extreme behavior originates. The notes also mention that the back ridges are tough unless other ridges are dealt with first. In-world, that reads like staged structural defense. The most critical components are protected by the broader network, and compromising them requires disrupting the supporting distribution points first. Now consider what it means that Jin Dahaad can vent from multiple points. Descriptions and observations repeatedly indicate it expels supercooled air and frost, not only from the mouth, but from vents along the body, including chest, lower body, tail, and claws. This shifts the cold from being an attack into being an environment. A breath weapon is directional. Distributed venting is spatial. It allows Jin Dahaad to fill an area with cold the way fog fills a basin, to change the behavior of surfaces not by targeting them, but by existing near them. In the Iceshard Cliffs, where traction is the currency of survival, changing surface behavior is equivalent to changing the rules of movement. This is where Jin Dahaad's locomotion becomes more than impressive. It becomes coherent. Despite its colossal size, it traverses the sheer cliffs and uneven terrain of its habitat with ease. It uses supercooling to generate ice on its claws, sticking to surfaces and allowing it to fight on cliff sides. The important thing is not the spectacle of a huge creature climbing. The important thing is the method. It manufactures adhesion. It brings a limb down, the surface freezes, the claw locks, and suddenly a wall is not a wall, it is a round. You can understand this in small terms if you've ever felt thin ice form quickly on a surface, how rapidly friction can change. A rock that was slick becomes something your hand can trust because moisture has been turned into grip. Jin Dahaad scales that idea up until it becomes architecture. Every contact point becomes an engineered foothold. The palm's spikes reinforce it. The creature does not simply step. It anchors, it digs in, it secures itself as if the world is something that will try to push it away. And it answers by fastening itself to the cliffs. That is why some encounters describe it clinging to steep structures and launching attacks from positions that feel impossible for something so large. It is not climbing like a nimble animal. It is making its own footholds. It is manufacturing stability. In a vertical ecosystem, this is a terrifying advantage because it means Jin Dahaad can occupy places other large monsters cannot reliably claim. From those places, it controls corridors, ledges, and approaches that everything else depends on. An apex in the cliffs does not need to sprint to dominate. It needs to control the crossings. It needs to appear at the one place you must pass. The frostwinds make that kind of control easier. The season compresses options. It pushes life into fewer usable routes. It makes every ledge more precious, every shelter more contested, every mistake more final. If Jin Dahaad is most active during the frostwinds, it is not because it is reckless. It is because the season finally matches it, and the ecosystem slows into its cadence. Jin Dahaad is described as highly territorial, pursuing intruders relentlessly once detected and once angered, remaining tenacious even when injured. During engagement, it violently rattles the cooling ridges on its head and back in a gesture akin to intimidation. In the cliffs, that gesture carries. Sound travels cleanly in cold air. It reflects off stone faces. It propagates down ledges and through narrow passes. A ridge rattle is not just a threat. It is a signal that changes behavior at distance. It tells smaller lives that the apex is awake, and in a place where safety depends on timing and route choice, that warning becomes part of the environment. There is also a functional logic to the rattle. The ridges are part of the cooling system. Increased agitation likely increases throughput, increases venting, increases cold output. Even if you avoid speculation and keep it conservative, the linkage is hard to ignore. The same structures involved in cooling are used in intimidation. Threat display and environmental weapon share anatomy. In Jin Dahaad, posture is not separate from physiology. The body signals because the body is the system. Its offensive abilities follow the same straight line. By using the plates on its head, it can fire a powerful freezing beam from its jaws that can freeze hunters and even stun other monsters. In the cliffs, freezing is more than damage. It is removal of options. A frozen body on a ledge is a body at risk. A frozen hunter cannot dodge. A frozen monster cannot climb. In a vertical biome, immobilization becomes a gravity weapon, and Jin Dahaad already has gravity on its side. Mass, coils, the ability to brace and anchor all reinforce that. The beam is not just an expression of cold. It is a decision about where the fight can happen. It can also generate icy armor for extra protection, which reads less like a separate trick and more like the same principle turned inward. If you can freeze quickly, you can harden moisture into structure. If you can vent cold through your body, you can build a shell where you need it. Cold, for Jin Dahaad, is material. The cliffs are full of moisture locked in snow seams and ice pockets, and Jin Dahaad treats that moisture as inventory. It turns the environment into a resource by changing state. Then there is the point where the monster stops feeling like an animal and starts feeling like weather. By pushing its cooling ability to the absolute limit, Jin Dahaad can encase both itself and the entire area in solid ice, sucking foes toward it in an icy vacuum effect, before unleashing a near-fatal explosion of snow and steam. Even described plainly, it is a frightening sequence because it reframes the arena as something that can be rewritten. Air becomes directional. Cold becomes force. Space collapses inward, then releases outward. It is less an attack than a change of state. The kind of event where survival becomes about understanding the environment faster than the environment changes. Some field notes about the hunt emphasize the same structural theme. Breaking its plating reduces the power and amount of ice it can produce, and if its plating is fully broken, it is rendered unable to use its ultimate attack for the rest of the hunt. Again, the mechanical detail reveals the biological one. This is not a monster whose cold is incidental. Its cold is infrastructure. Damage the infrastructure, the weather it can produce becomes less complete. Despite being apex of the Iceshard Cliffs, Jin Dahaad is not typically hunted there. It is fought in the Rime Chain Peak. That shift tells you something about scale and containment. The cliffs are where it is seen during the frostwinds. where it perches and asserts presence along roots and ledges, where it compresses movement simply by being above it. But the full confrontation happens where the land can actually hold it, where its coils and its breath and its arena-shaping output can unfold without the geometry of the cliffs limiting the spectacle. In ecological terms, it reads like a seasonal range behavior. The cliffs are a hunting and territorial pressure zone during inclemency. The peak is where the creature belongs when it is not exerting dominance on the narrower routes below. There are other details that quietly reinforce the sense that Jin Dahaad sits outside normal assumptions. It is not classified as an elder dragon, yet it cannot be captured, although it can be shock-trapped. It is also recorded as exceptionally large for its class, with a length in the mid-40-meter range according to series measurements. Those are metadata facts, but they contribute to tone. Jin Dahaad reads as something the ecosystem tolerates rather than something it contains. The cliffs are not its cage, they are its instrument. So when you return to the Frostwinds and ask why Jin Dahaad becomes more active rather than less, the answer is not mysticism, it is fit. When the environment makes everyone else slow and cautious, the organism built to remain stable gains tempo. It gains initiative. It gains a world shaped around the strengths it already has. The Frostwinds reduce visibility, make footing unreliable, and push life into fewer usable routes. A monster that can secure its footing by freezing the ground and climb by freezing its limbs to walls gains advantage exactly when everyone else is forced to hesitate. And this is where the cliffs begin to read like a story the ecosystem is telling. Most life chooses patience. It waits in hollows. It clings to recessed ledges. It stops spending energy in the open because the open is too expensive. Jin Dahaad does the opposite. It uses the season as leverage. It turns cold into adhesion. It turns cold into armor. It turns cold into territory. It turns cold into the reason other creatures decide not to move. If you listen late at night, you can let the cliffs settle into a simpler image. Snow moving sideways in steady sheets. Wind threading through stone corridors like a constant breath. A ledge lined with ice, glittering faintly where it catches whatever light exists. High above, a vast serpentine body is anchored to the rock. Not scrambling, not rushing, just secured. Ice plates fanned outward, steam lifting as heat is shunted away. Claws pressed into stone, frost forming at the contact like a signature. A tail laid along the ridge, like a line drawn across the mountain, as if the cliffs themselves have been marked. And below, the smaller lives of the region make the only sensible choice. They choose shelter. They choose stillness. They choose not to test the vertical roots when the season is at its harshest. Because in the Frostwinds, the safest strategy is often not bravery. It is patience. It is waiting until the world loosens again, until visibility returns, until traction feels honest, until the cliffs stop bracing. And when they do, when the inclemency fades and the region returns to its calmer rhythm, Jin Dahaad does what it has always done. It withdraws, back toward the higher cold, back toward the places where its scale and its system feel most at home, back toward the rhyme chain peak. Let it stay there. Let the wind stay in the cliffs. Let the cold remain in the high places, sealed behind stone and distance. Good night, hunter.